Right, so welcome everyone to this ROV discussion on using biosensing devices to deepen meditation. So all of us here kind of met through this idea of using biosensing devices to deepen meditation. And it's been something we've all been exploring and sharing for the last, since I guess the end of 2018. And Stephen and I, when we got together and we shared our meditation experiences and shared these different sequences that we went through and started recording them and then started sharing graphs. And so today what I want to do is start kind of with those, and we did that on Muse. I want to start with those kind of original Muse graph of this particular meditation sequence, and then go to what the flow time graph of that same sequence shows and how there's some differences there. And then show some brain maps of lab EEG of the same meditation sequence. And we'll see some different things there. And then Kiefer did some power spectrum density graphs of each part of the meditation for me. And also has been able to give some great insight into these strange gamma readings that we started to get with Muse way back when. So let's just start as a basic idea that subtle energy meditation has this kind of foundational idea of energizing and then going into stillness and quietness. So a real focus concentration on energy, so raising energy with the purpose of kind of activating the nervous system and heightening focus, attention, energy awareness, and then using that as a means to go into deeper states of stillness while staying awake and alert. So there's this kind of back and forth between energizing stillness, energizing pure awareness, and so on. And so that's what I was testing in these sequences, is that progression. So let me share my screen, and I'm gonna, whoops, that's what I want to share. And let's begin here. Okay, can you see my arrow here? Can you see the arrow moving? Okay. And then I'm gonna move that over here. Okay. All right, so what I want to do is, what I've been doing over these years is testing basically a sequence of 6 different practices, techniques, so on. And this was kind of the original Muse graph that we started to see and post, and it had some interesting things and some weird things. But let me just take you through the 6 parts of this practice. First, in this first section over here, we have a lower dantian breathing. So it's a kind of a calm, centering practice to begin the meditation, to focus attention, but in a very calm, centered way. And then we have this breathing up through the spine into a section called light above the crown, which you can't see it, but it only goes about halfway through here. So the first half of this apparently elevated gamma beta is this breathing up through the spine and then resting and breathing in this energized feeling above the crown. So we call it light above the crown. And then what doesn't show here is that then there's a movement down from there into the heart and breathing love out from the heart. But at least on this graph, it looks pretty much exactly the same as the light above the crown. There's just a expansive, this was an elevated high energy feeling. This, in this second half, is an expansive feeling of love radiated out to all beings. So those are the first three parts. So that's the high energy phase. And then we drop into this stillness. So stillness down in the perineum, stillness down in the earth. So really feeling the sensation of stillness, listening to the silence. And then you see here this alpha over theta. So I want you to note alpha over theta here as well as gamma over beta there. And then out of the stillness, there's an expansion into feeling the whole space. So the infinite space of awareness. So this again is a very highly lit, energized, expansive feeling. And at least on Muse, it shows as a gamma over beta at the top. And then out of there, again, it's using that high energy, high focus, high concentration to drop. And this time just dropping deep into a letting go of all form and content, just a kind of an empty mind, a pure awareness, just a resting as pure awareness. And you'll see, at least on Muse, the gamma goes way down here. And again, it's kind of that alpha over theta. So if you just note that gamma over beta there and the alpha over theta there as we move on to the flow time of the same meditation. Okay, move this over here. Okay, so in flow time, you'll see the same sections here, the lower Dantian breathing. And as we go up into the light above the crown, again, it doesn't differentiate here between that light above the crown and breathing love through the heart. They just seem to be one highly energized state. But you'll notice here, now the colors on flow time are different. So this light colored blue is beta. And so in here in flow time, it's showing beta over gamma over alpha. So little difference. And what we've learned from flow time is that they have filtered gamma a little bit lower. So you wouldn't be seeing as much of it if there was higher gamma. But you're seeing more of the high beta range here. And then as you go into the stillness, instead of the alpha over theta, you see it's the theta overriding on top. So, and again, with Muse, they seem to, the alpha from 7.5 to 8, and then they have theta going also in that range from 7.5 to 8. So there's some kind of mixing of alpha and theta, and it's not as clearly defined as to what theta is. Whereas here you see the theta is more clearly defined above the other waves. Okay, so just noticing that different devices have different ways that they divide the brain waves. So you could, beta, for instance, could be 12 to 25, it could be 12 to 30, it could be 12 to 32, and how the device divides that, where they divide that, will give you a different relationship as you look at your graphs. Okay, and then we go into this expanded feeling of whole field awareness, infinite spacious awareness. Again, you see the high beta overriding here. And then into the stillness, and you see the, in this case, the theta overriding on flow time. Okay, so just different devices are going to use different ranges and different filters, and that's going to give different graphs. So you may think, you know, we have this kind of idea about these graphs that, oh, that's showing what my brain is doing, okay? But it really is showing you a certain picture depending on how the different brainwave ranges are divided up and how they're filtered and where the sensors are and which parts of the brain they're reading. So it's really a lot more complex than we might like to make it in our discussions. All right, so that was flow time. Now, went into the lab again. This is my second trip into the lab. And this time, in addition to this 19 electrode cap, I had a temperature sensor, a heart rate sensor, and galvanic skin response sensor. And so they gave some additional information, as well as the brainwaves. And here you see the raw data. And in the raw data, you can see those two plateaus right here in especially the frontal 2 sensors. That's where that high beta gamma is showing. And you can see this is all the 19 sensors listed there. Whoops, sorry. All the 19 sensors listed there down the left. Okay, now we're going to get into some pretty interesting brain maps of the different sections. Okay, so just let's focus on the top 7 here, because this is going from delta, theta, alpha, low beta, high beta, low gamma, high gamma. Okay, and then these are just broken out into, that's a different range of alpha, that's a different range of alpha, 2 different ranges of beta. So let's just focus here for simplicity's sake. So this is lower Dantian breathing. One thing I really want you to note here is this theta right in the frontal center, because this, you're going to find that this pretty much stays there through all the different states. And then you have some delta in the center, some alpha kind of in the back rear. And Kiefer is going to talk a little later about what some of that means. And then in the high beta and gamma, that's kind of sitting in the occipital area. And that's also, this is from my last lab test, this was pretty much what my baseline looks like too. It's pretty much that picture. So lower Dantian breathing, that's kind of a pattern I've developed over 30 plus years, and it's just kind of something that I'm doing all the time. And it just, so that's kind of a resting state for me here. Okay, so that's first 7 minutes lower Dantian breathing. And then that's just, again, that's a finer look at the higher beta and gamma in that lower Dantian breathing. So make note it's back here in the occipital number 1. Okay, now we'll go into this Taurus breathing, this breathing up through the central channel into the light above the crown. Okay, so here you'll see a really different situation apparently. But look at the theta, it's pretty much the same place, same intensity here. But what it looks like in this is that instead of the high beta and gamma resting back here, it's been drawn into the frontal sensors. And it also looks like it's drawing delta and alpha on low beta into the frontal area of the brain also. Okay, so quite a different situation from the lower Dantian breathing. Okay, now we go into, let's see, this is 14 to 21 minutes. So this is the breathing love through the heart. Here again, you see the theta, it's pretty much the same place, same intensity. Alpha is still sitting back here. And in this higher intensity focus, it looks like delta is drawn forward here. And then the gamma is in this right temporal area, as well as a little bit in the occipital area. So just simply a shift of focus from up here down into the heart, and it's changing what's happening with both which waves are more active and where they're active, except for the theta, which is pretty consistent. Okay, now we go into stillness. And then in stillness, we see that theta still right there in the front center. We see a little more activity of the delta in the center of the brain and the alpha back here in the center and rear of the brain. But look at the high beta and gammas moved into the right occipital area. Okay, so again, all we're doing here is shifting from the heart and breathing love outwards, a very expansive feeling, down into stillness in the perineum and stillness in the earth. So it's just a shift in focus changes the state of consciousness, changes the brain waves. And again, this is also to show that each of these states have their function and purpose. Okay, so each one brings something to your state of consciousness and becomes kind of like a tool for your mind. It becomes something that adds to your whole state of awareness and can be called forth as needed. All right, so that's stillness. Now we're going to go brain maps of this expanded spacious awareness. And again, you see the theta right here. But here you see this apparently really strong high beta gamma in the frontal area, and it looks like it's drawn delta and alpha into that area as well. And you see the back of the brain looks like it's very quiet for those frequencies. So that's the expanded awareness. Now we drop into just quiet mind, empty mind, pure awareness. Here again, you'll see the theta is still right there. And you'll see that strong delta here and the strong alpha, all in the center of the brain. And then you'll see a return to this gamma kind of resting in the left occipital area. And again, that just shows the gamma in the back. Okay, and then this is post-meditation, just resting afterwards. You'll see it's pretty similar to the start, except this delta, theta, and alpha look like they're a little more prominent in the center of the brain. They're a little more active. And the gamma at the back left of the brain might be a little more prominent, or could be pretty similar to at the beginning. Okay. So that's the brain maps, and those were from Dr. Leslie Burgess, who has the neurofeedback lab where I did this lab. And these are the 19 electrodes that were being measured. And now Kiefer did some very interesting power spectrum density graphs. And again, we'll go through and see kind of a deeper view of what's happening in each of these segments. So this is lower Dantian breathing. You'll see that elevated delta. Then you'll see this very prominent and synchronized theta at 5.5 to 6. You'll see another theta at about 8. And then this low alpha reading at just under 10. So that's the lower Dantian breathing. And then you'll see in the occipital sensors, and all the colors are color-coded here for the different sensors. These are the occipital higher beta and gamma readings. All right, so let's just go through and we'll take a look at each of these. Okay, now here, it looks pretty dramatic here. This is the light above the crown section. And here you still see the delta, theta, and low alpha here, but you see this apparent huge ocean of, let me move that. So this is right about 30 hertz and above up to 50 hertz. And again, this headset was filtered just above 50. So you'll see at 50, it just kind of drops off here. But So it looks like there's really high beta there, again, depending on where you divide beta and gamma. If you divide it at 25, then this is low gamma and high gamma. If you divide it at 30, then it's high beta, low gamma, and higher gamma. So this is the light above the crown section. So apparently, it seems as if there are high beta and gamma readings here. Then we go into love through the heart. And as we saw in the brain maps, this shows the high delta readings. We again have the theta, which is pretty consistent, right about 5.5 or 6. The higher theta about 8, and then the alpha at about 10. So low alpha, alpha 1. And this is a breathing love through the heart. And then you'll see some temporal beta and gamma here. All right, now we go on. Here's the stillness section. And in stillness, you'll see that high delta, very high theta here, right about 6. And then the low alpha, actually a higher theta and then a low alpha here. And pretty much everything else is pretty quiet. All right, and then we go into that whole field awareness. Again, apparently, it looks pretty dramatic here, but again, you have that consistent delta, low theta, and then high theta to low alpha here. And then it looks like, and this is a little bit higher, this is up to about 35 hertz and up to 52. So high beta and gamma, these are the frontal sensors again. And then it looks like it's also kind of synchronizing all the other sensors. It looks like kind of a whole brain synchronization there. There's a nice synced flow of all the other sensors here. Okay. And then we have the just resting as pure awareness. Again, you have the high delta, the low theta, the higher theta, and the low alpha here. Okay, so that all looks like it's supporting what we're seeing in Muse and Flowtime. Apparently, the lab is supporting that and pointing toward this higher beta and higher gamma in these elevated and expanded states. So Kiefer has been kind of the man on a mission here for the last couple years of trying to figure out what's really going on with this apparent higher beta and gamma readings. Because originally in the Muse reading, we had in those higher gamma and beta readings, there was the raw data was seemed to be pretty noisy. Okay, so we thought, oh, maybe it's just the headset. And so I went into the lab and did the lab, and it seemed to correlate, just like you saw in these graphs. Now, Kiefer has done some new filtering and some new analysis to kind of get a sense for what's really happening here. And okay, that's the final 2 minutes resting. So again, this is what we're seeing in that high beta gamma section before Kiefer has applied this filter, which is going to scrub out nervous system activity behind the eyes. So originally in the Muse community, when we posted, Stephen and I posted these gamma and high gamma and beta graphs, there was this kind of controversy, and it's like, oh, well, you're moving your eyes, you're tensing your eyes, something's happening around your eyes. And we're like, well, we assure you that our eyes are still, and even our eyes can be still and focused anywhere and stay still and we still get this. And it's, well, your eyes are blinking. And it's like, no, actually, our eyes aren't blinking. But what Kiefer is, he sent along a research article that shows that there's small muscles behind the eyes. So your eyes and your eyelids can be completely still and focused, but there can be muscle activity. There can be these little currents behind the eyes that are causing it to look, that are being interpreted as high beta and high gamma. And as I'm doing these sections, my sensation, as you know, probably lots of you have started to experience this too with subtle energy meditation, is as if this whole area, the front, the third eye, the crown, the occipital area is just like it's lit up with energy, like there's an electrical pulsing going on. And that's part of the energizing of Kriya or Qigong or even Tumo, which it's part of this energizing. It's activating the nervous system so that you heighten awareness, you heighten your attention, you heighten your focus. And so you are activating your nervous system, and that's kind of the purpose of those sections. But what they are creating is it's making it look like it's not just nervous system activation, but it's brainwave activation. And when Kiefer scrubs out that nervous system activity, this is what that same section looks like. So go back, see, here's what it looks like before. Here's what it looks like after. You'll see high delta, high theta, we're at just about 6. Again, the high theta, just about 8. And then the low alpha, just about 10. So this signature, which was present in all the stillness states, is actually present in all the high energy states as well. So this is just kind of my signature as I'm meditating, no matter what I'm doing. And it's also kind of my signature in resting state too, after all these years of doing this, is that's just kind of how my brain is operating now, regardless of if I'm feeling high energy, which is high nervous system activation, high attention, high energy, or if I'm feeling real deep stillness. And you'll see that up here, all these ranges are really very quiet. So that was really enlightening. And so I'd like Kiefer to kind of come on here. Let me see if I can move this around and stop sharing screen. So while I try to figure out how to get the whole screen back. I'll stop share. There we go. Okay. So Kiefer, if you would like to come on, you had some really interesting comments that related to what that kind of dominant pattern in my brain relates to.
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you so much for sharing all the graphs and everything like that as well. And I think the three, and you kind of hit upon it as well as you were talking about, almost like these three main kind of features that we're kind of seeing, and that's the kind of like I usually pin it around like a 6 hertz, an 8 hertz, and a 10 hertz function. It's typically those three. But there is a bit of wiggle room there, so it seems to be like a 5 to a 6, and a 7 to an 8, and then around a 10. So there is some wiggle room there, and so I guess the biggest thing to start talking about is the classic alpha, right? And so alpha, we see from your graphs particularly, was this huge alpha activity very centrally, so along FZ and CZ, which are along, just like you showed in the graphs, those big kind of red spots that are around kind of the central areas of your crown. And those are really along the hub of that DMN, right? So that network that we're often, utilizing as a way of interacting with the world around us, and then referencing what those things mean to ourselves. And it's really a core of that, egoic self, or that identity, or that real deep sense of I. And so we see that really, really strong 8 hertz activity in the FZ and CZ, and then we see that, and also a strong 10 hertz at PZ, which is basically right over those kind of somatic association areas, which are all those, those very, very core identity areas. And what's really interesting about this is kind of what alpha is known for. And, alpha is basically the brainwave of suppression. That's kind of a very, if we were to put a very general function on it, alpha is, it's almost like going in idle, or it's almost like a car going into neutral. It's something where, there's still activity there, or still the readiness for activity, but it's in this kind of suppressed state. And so I think from there, it very much alludes to the quieting of the mind from many different ways. From one area, more frontally in the front, the FZ and the CZ, associating with the kind of more sensory areas in terms of things associating with your body and the senses and those types of rhythms. And then those kind of being suppressed as we go into that quiet mind type of focus. And then in the parietal areas, those more sense of self type of identity types of things being toned down to basically allow for this, this meditative state to take over. And that's really what as well Jeff Tarrant talks a lot about, is that low alpha, that very much that central low alpha, right? That really kicks into, and it's really characteristic of somebody getting into a really quiet mind type of state. Then secondary from that, or I actually wouldn't say secondary, because this is a stronger feature power-wise, is the theta that we see. And that theta is incredibly strong and basically becomes the dominant feature on your graph. And so very much becomes, you can almost say it very much becomes like iconic as not only a quiet mind, but something that is also, experiencing something beyond, like, it's not just like a simple mindfulness exercise or something like that, where somebody's just kind of quieting their mind. What we're seeing with theta is increasingly, like, I usually call it, like transcendental. Like, typically there's something transcendental occurring. Some people will say, like mysticism, like with the, the classic Carmelite nun study, they had that kind of similar theta as well. And Jeff Tarrant as well, he calls it like the kind of the spicing it up, to where when people kind of get deep into this state, it's almost like the theta is an expression of a deep meditation that is connected you with something deeper. I guess it's a very hard way to describe, because the theta could describe so many different forms of, mysticism or asceticism or visionary experiences or intuitive experiences and so on. But I think that's really key for your graphs, Kevin, is that you have that really, really strong activity in that regard.
So that would relate kind of to this pervasive experience of infinite spacious.
Yeah. So
that's just kind of what I feel all the time, is just this infinite space within which life is happening.
Yeah, it almost seems like kind of like
personal. It's just like life is happening here. It's not really anything to do with me.
And it seems like it's very like, as worldly as it is, it's very otherworldly, I would say. It's almost like this is kind of where our language almost fails to serve us, where it's like, it's such a transcendent version of an everyday perception, I guess. It's such a different, it's perceiving the things that are around us, but in a way that is so different than our normal default kind of functioning. And very much, I think as well, in those types of theta states, there's always usually some type of connection with something. I know that's like a common trait. I don't know if the theta is the thing that is responsible for connecting, or if it's just something that co-occurs, but that is something that I think, and that's why I typically will use the word transcendent, because that's kind of my word for when we connect outward to something beyond ourselves. And that's what we see in those deeper kind of states. And that's why theta has that kind of mystical association with it, is that seems to be one of the key areas that can fire up in relation to those types of experiences. And the other thing as well, I would say, just looking at the brain maps right now in this session, is also the effect of suppression as something to look for. I think because I think we as humans or as kind of whatever we are, we almost look for activation, but suppression is just as valuable in the brain as activation. And in many ways, because people might connotate suppression as a bad thing, or that you would not want to be suppressed, but that's the brain's normal function, is I need to suppress this to accentuate this, and then, oh, in a different scenario, I need to, clamp down on this so I can accentuate this. And it's really all about kind of moving about resources and almost like changing its configuration to be like, okay, whatever is relevant, bring that up, and whatever's not relevant, kind of clamp that down and suppress it. And one of the great examples of suppression I can give as a positive thing is it's kind of funny, but creativity induced by marijuana, right? So when people smoke marijuana and they have that increased kind of flow of creativity, and they're kind of like coming up with ideas and this and that, that's actually the cannabis inhibiting inhibition in a way that stimulates flow. And so that's an example of how inhibiting something actually increases the flow, downstream somewhere else. And so I talk about suppression in a way that, because we're seeing, a lot of that in your brain maps. Because if you look at your brain maps, the different heat maps and the colored ones, we have the red spots, which are very highly activated. And then green spots would be kind of like normal. It's like normal activation, or whatever control person it's comparing you to, then that would be equivalent. And then blue, which there's a lot of blue, is actually areas where there's significant like underactivity, or this area of the brain is not as active as it would be in a normal person's brain, or whatever control they compared you to. And so it's really interesting as well to look for those red spots of activation, but it's just as important to look for those blue areas of suppression, because they inform us just as much about what's going on in the brain, and the different areas that are being altered, and the networks and all the different anatomical areas that are having their resources basically shuttled around, and having increased oxygen availability here. But in order to provide that, we're going to section off some vasculature in the back of the brain, or something like that. And so in that way, that dynamic between going into a state is a very huge balance between, a very dynamic and interchanging balance between things that are being turned on and things that are being kind of clamped down or suppressed. I think that I talk about the things that you want me to talk about. I think we hit the alpha, PZ,
and then
theta,
then what do you make of the delta? Is that something to
Yeah, and so that's something that we see as well that gets modulated, especially centrally, which I noticed as well, where I know just off the top of my head, that delta modification in the very central areas was something that was seen in the Tibetan Buddhist meditators. And so for that, I would key that into not similar to the role of alpha, but somewhat related to the role of alpha in modulating the activity of those areas. And so you can imagine that a lot of times my view of, and this is just kind of my view on the very low brain waves in meditation, in that they can have an effect to alter the overall excitability of the brain and to kind of go into an area and change, it's like maybe they're too slow to actually be responsible for direct functions, but as a rolling wave across an area, they can basically change the electrical excitability to a point where it's at a different baseline. And so you can imagine your brain's at a certain level, and that certain level requires, let's just say, a certain amount of stimulation to get it excited. And what a low brainwave can sometimes do, and what we're sometimes seeing that they could have this role in meditation, is that they then go and alter that threshold to where, all right, if the brain takes this much energy to get excited, then it can go down. We can alter that threshold in order to make it, more or less excitable overall. And so that's kind of some of the things that we're seeing on delta in terms of how it can shift and shift your baseline, I guess, or just shift your overall gear to alter something.
Yeah, great. That's really helpful and insightful. Does anyone have questions or comments or want to share something about? Yeah, Connie.
I wrote down 5 questions, but I will take turns. So maybe we could come back if somebody else doesn't ask one of my questions later. So I'll just start with the first one that came up during your presentation. And kind of for Kevin and maybe Kiefer. So it's sort of a chicken and an egg situation. Which comes first, the brainwaves changing or the felt sensation? Do we go into expansiveness and therefore our brainwaves change? Or do we train ourselves somehow to change those brainwaves to induce that feeling? And, is there a benefit to one way or the other?
Well, my first take on that is that especially in this sequence, I'm like the doctor is just cueing me. She says 7 minutes, and at 7 minutes I change to a different focal point. So I consciously initiate that, and then the brain waves follow that. And then at 14 minutes, she says 14 minutes. And then I change my focal point and the brain waves follow that. And so on throughout the whole segment. Now, these are all states that I've trained for decades, right? So they're just really in here. So to go to them is just a matter of saying, okay, there now. But just because it's trained. So I would say it's shifting the focal awareness, the focal object, and then the brain waves are following that. Now, you can see though that, especially once it's scrubbed out, that there is kind of a brainwave signature for my brain now, no matter what I'm doing. It's just kind of like, this is how Kevin's brain operates now at this point in time, after doing, meditation for 36, 37 years. So in that sense, it doesn't so much matter, doesn't matter as much what I'm doing. My brain kind of has these sort of grooves that it rolls on through all these states. So keep
Can I ask a question related to that? This is like a press conference, isn't it? Follow-up question, please. So you talk about the signatures of your brain waves. So am I correct in assuming then that each individual would have an individual signature, correct? So yet I often read or hear about people who are striving for certain signatures because they think that connects to particular ways of being that they might find preferable. Are there certain signatures that we should look for, strive for, try to train our brains to activate?
Yeah, so I would say the brain waves are secondary, right? It's the states of consciousness that we're training. And that's what makes a difference in our experience of life and our relationships with others, and just the state of consciousness we rest in. That's what we're practicing, is the states and the cues and the awareness. That's what we're practicing. And then the brain waves are one correlation with that. And if you've practiced certain things for a long time, then they become traits in your brain. That instead of just being something I experience in meditation, it's just something I live from.
So given that, then if I were to train to feel that state, which I feel that I have changed the way I feel during meditation significantly over the course of practicing subtle energy meditation. And yet I've fallen away from use of the muse to some extent, because I find that I end up thinking about what the muse is going to tell me instead of focusing completely on how I'm experiencing or feeling the states. I feel that I almost get a purer experience without the technology in my case. Yet for someone like me, what would the benefit be of using the technology then? Is that something that could still be beneficial in various ways, or is it sort of a optional thing?
Well, I can say it depends on the person, right? It depends on your relationship to it. When I was taking the muse when we had group meditation classes and taking them in, almost universally people would say, oh, when I have the muse on, I'm really present and staying focused because I want to, I'm being measured. So now I want to really focus. I want to really do this. I'm not just going to let my mind go anywhere because it's being measured. So I think that can be a great benefit of all these devices if you have the right relationship to that. And you're not saying, oh, I'm trying to achieve this, but what you're doing is being present and absorbed in awareness of the cues that you're following, and more globally in awareness itself. And the device being on your head just keeps reminding you to, oh, I want to do that now. So I think it can really be helpful in that way. And it can be counterproductive if you get into judging and comparing your graphs with others and debating about which is the right brain waves and which is all that. Then yeah, I think it could be counterproductive.
I mean, I really appreciate that, because I feel that, yeah, I had a kind of a counterproductive relationship with it, in that I would sit there and think, okay, is my gamma going to go high enough today?
Right.
How can I make that happen more? Instead of, when I meditate without the muse, I often just feel like transcendence, wholeness, oneness. And I focus more on that and less on, oh, I wonder what my theta is doing now. But that's just me. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Holly?
Yeah, I was just going to say just two supportive things that might be helpful. In your first question, Connie, about the chicken and egg question, to me, that's what the Muse trend graphs that I did, the long-term ones, were really validating for. And I brought one up if you want me to share it, just to kind of show again if people forgot. But it showed how my brain increased in theta across 2 years of doing meditation. And so to me, that was a state to trait effect that I could see, because remember, in those graphs that I did, it took one theta value for the entire meditation, like a single value. So all it is, by tracking daily, is just showing the magnitude of theta increasing over 2 years of doing meditation. So to me, that was the evidence that I needed. Yeah, Randy.
No, and I was going to add, also my take. I first wanted to thank Kevin for sharing this. It's really cool. I loved it. I wish I could get that done. And maybe someday we'll all have home devices that will do even more than that. And I expect that's coming. But anyway, really cool. I set out with an intention, because I had read so much about theta as being what Kiefer was describing, as kind of this place that, where you have experiences. And I can also validate what Holly just said. Holly actually is the one that got me started on using MindLift to try to focus specifically on developing theta brainwaves. So that's one way you can use these devices. I think MindLift is one example that will help you focus on a particular thing. Now I'm so ingrained in theta, I can show though in my charts how theta has risen successively since I started using the Muse device, and it's increased in magnitude and continues to increase in magnitude. And for me, it's really the state of deliciousness is how I would describe it. You're really, it's such a rewarding experience to be in a high theta state. So I've always been intrigued by, the descriptions of gamma and wanting to develop that. And I'm having such a difficult time. I was making a lot more progress with gamma back in April than I am today. And that's because I'm just so entrained now in this theta groove that I have a hard time getting out of it. I posted a chart today. I did Kevin's 8 Taurus breathing, the 8 Taurus breathing, and my head was just literally lit up with what I thought was electricity. And I said, man, I know that's going to be a great gamma chart, and there's no gamma at all. So I don't know what that is, but it felt really good and my head was lit up, and I know there was an energy change there. So I agree with you, Holly, and anyway, I love using devices, as everyone I think knows. So thank you.
So Kiefer, do you want to comment on that, the gamma?
Yeah, so I think for the gamma stuff, it's pretty like, I think like the portable headset market creates a lot of kind of like ghosts for people to chase. I think there's a better expression that sums that up than that. But and that really echoes a lot of the discussions I've had with developers and EEG manufacturers that are commenting on this kind of portable market, in that they often get very, very frustrated. One of them just sent me a paper. It was called Mind Reading or Misleading, a report on consumer EEGs. And because basically it creates just like that kind of suspicion of gamma, and is it there or is it not there? And it creates a lot of kind of desire, a lot of different targets for people that may not be kind of targets in the first place. I think for Muse as well, I think it's, I could say this was in that paper that I sent you, Kevin, but I think it's a really great one, because in that table 1 that they have, it like summarizes like what I spent probably, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 years, like painstakingly trying to figure out with Muse, and that the different categories of ocular artifacts that there are, and the different ways that they can lead into basically signals coming from the front, which is kind of what Muse relies upon. And to give the long story short, you can have delta theta artifacts from eyelid movements. So eyeball and eyelid movements, that's between like 0 and 4.5 hertz, those will clock in at. Between 4 and 20 hertz, you'll get these corneal retinal dipole interactions. And that is basically because your eyeballs are basically just magnetic dipoles, and the front of them is more positive and the back of them is more negative. And so when you move them around, you're kind of rotating these magnetic fields that then relate to, will then upshift or downshift a EEG signal that's connected to the front. And then the final one, which was the one that was tricky for us, which is the Cicadic responses. And that's typically between like 12 to 20 to all the way up to 90 hertz. And that's a very broad spectrum Cicadic response. So I say Cicadic response. Cicadic response is basically like a type of eye movement that you don't really notice. A Cicadic movement is micromotion of extraocular muscles that causes basically, all these little tiny eye muscles that we have that are behind our eyes. They move in kind of micro amounts, and their little tiny but high frequency activities will cause that very broadband type of response. And so from that perspective, since things like Muse or Flowtime often only see the front, then it can become very difficult to set goals when that frontal-based EEG is so contaminated with stuff that's from your eyes, your face, your forehead, and probably stuff outside in your environment as well. And so from that perspective, we see a lot of different artifacts that can take place. I know one particular, to put like figures on it, there was one study that years ago got a hold of Muse's database, and they wanted to do like this very large scale testing using portable EEGs on the from the Muse's consumer base, and they basically worked with Interaxon, got access to Interaxon's basically huge database that they'd been keeping at that point of all of the Muse recordings that they basically, you record them and then they'll store them on their server. There's about 160,000 recordings I think they got access to, and in the end, I think it was like 25,000 of those recordings were the ones that were deemed usable and free of enough contamination to actually be representative of some kind of brain function. And so I think, from that perspective, it can be difficult to use a headband style EEG and to try and really hit home on what are some really concrete targets, because it's consistently a very mixed bag of signals that are then contributing to that. The companies, and I've heard this a few times, and it makes a lot of sense when you really think about it, and the companies that are making these headsets, like Interaxon or the Flowtime guys and many others, really don't know a lot about brain science. Like, they're really good at engineering and making a device and making things to kind of get out there, but in actually being intuitive with the neuroscience and understanding how to use the signal that is coming from these headsets in a way that's eloquent enough to get really reliable results is often really spurious, and they often have a pretty poor track record of figuring out well, how do we define a meditation state? How do we even define how do we even define a theta state or an alpha state? Does it go to 7? Does it go to 7.5? Does it go to 8? Do we have some overlap there? How do we filter our gamma? And a lot of times they really don't know how to do that. And that's one of the reasons as well why you see the big differences in like the Muse and Flowtime with what you just showed, Kevin. Basically you doing the exact same meditations, but seeing very similar results, but you can see how their own opinion on how brainwaves should be interpreted really determines what their output ultimately becomes. And so I think the future will kind of yield that the hardware will continue to advance, but the software and just the kind of knowledge of how to use these signals will kind of have to advance as we move through and do all that kind of stuff.
I
Can I
thought
ask
it
you
was
a question,
interesting that,
Kiefer?
okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just curious. So getting back to theta brainwaves, though, I know that you've educated us about gamma and delta in particular being susceptible to these muscular artifacts or movement. Is theta as susceptible? And then what about if there's a correlation between the Muse device and the Flowtime device, you know, on a brainwave like theta? Is that something that has any significance, or should we basically just ignore all of these things? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, remind me of your first question really quick.
Well, so is theta as susceptible to the artifacts?
Oh, right.
Delta and gamma.
So yes and no. So I would say no, it's not. It is susceptible, but it is not as susceptible. So delta and the higher beta and gamma, I would say, like those are the two ringers for, those are your kind of more obvious ports of call for artifacts, just because gamma readings, when they're in that artifact form, tend to be pretty dominant, I would say. Like that Cicadic response is pretty overwhelming, it's pretty obvious, and it's pretty overbearing. It kind of takes over the signal. And it's also a reasonably common one. And then on the flip side of that, I would say the kind of eyeball movement is also somewhat common that I'm seeing with meditation. And since those ring in the delta range, well, it's mostly the delta range, but they can also come up a little bit into the theta range, but they're typically a pretty low frequency. The other artifacts that are, for example, between like 4 and 20 hertz, we don't, or at least in my experience, I haven't seen as much. And so I typically, yeah, and it's like, it's kind of weird because like I haven't seen them personally, but I have read a paper that was using Muse, and the artifacts that they pointed out, they're like, oh, well, theta alpha was our highest contaminated band. And that's, you know, and that's like, okay, so I'm thinking about that. They weren't doing a meditation study. The study they were doing was actually, they were having people in a lecture hall and they were watching a lecture. And so I think for the purposes of meditation and our tool set and our experiences, it's going to be the very low and the very high, the beta, gamma, and the delta that are most susceptible. Everything is susceptible to artifacts, but I think you're reasonably safe. Knock on wood and every other type of thing I can touch or do to, I think you're reasonably safe in the theta alpha range. The things that are giveaways that it could be artifacts is if like how you see beta and gamma sometimes when they artifact, they'll almost like they'll have like parallel activity. It's almost like they're one in the same brain. If your delta and your theta were tied at the hip, then it doesn't necessarily mean it's an artifact, but it would trigger something in my brain to be like, oh, that's funny. That's something I should take a look at in the file to see if there's some interference that is occurring across a range of frequencies and is therefore making those range of frequencies rise up and down together or simultaneously.
What if you saw that same pattern though multiple times? You know, if there's that would seem to suggest it's not related to an artifact, but I don't know. I guess that's a question.
Except I have 500 Muse graphs and 100 Flowtime graphs that are pretty much exactly the same. And they're all that, I mean, whenever I raise the energy like we do in Qigong or Kriya or Tuma. Whenever the energy is raised or expanded, it's stimulating. And another thing that's telling from the lab that tells me it's stimulating the nervous system is my heart rate increases and my skin temperature increased by 3 degrees. So, so that tells me this is there's energy here and it's affecting the nervous system, and then that's affecting behind the eyeballs, right? The small muscles there, and then you're getting that high beta gamma artifact.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Abby.
Thank you. I have 14 questions. No, I have some questions. Can you share with us the first graph that you showed us, Kevin?
That you mean the Muse graph?
Yes.
Uh,
Because I can sleep thinking about this all the time.
all right, so hold on, it's gonna be a little remove us. Okay, that one.
Okay, I think I have made this question many times in the different in the Facebook group, but I have seen many graphs, but none is as steep as your graphs.
That's just
Nobody makes such a big shift in energy so fast. So I think there's something we are missing.
Well, that's 35 plus years of Qigong. You know, that's if I'm visualizing, feeling energy flowing, it's there. It's just long.
That's important because what you are saying is that
thing.
it's important that we sit and practice, but
Yeah.
the difference for a long time is how well we manage energy through different disciplines as Qigong or Kung Fu or things like that.
Yeah, I really just think it's a matter of grooving states through practice. Because if I'm sitting there with anything, any headset on, and I just say, okay, now this, then the graph shifts immediately. Doesn't depend on anything but where and how I'm focusing my attention. Just because that's grooved and familiar. It's just something I practice so much that I can just say, okay, that now. And then, and Stephen's the same way. It's just states that have been grooved over decades of practice.
But energy management, it's crucial. It's very important to achieve this
And
kind of
attention management, attention control.
Okay.
So it's one, if you can just say, okay, I'm focused on that now and nothing else. There's nothing else that's coming in except that. So again, that's just, it's just training the mind.
Okay. I have another question, if I may. Can you put the graph that Kevin filtered the effects of the muscle movements?
You mean the last graphs?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're gonna scoot through all these.
I don't understand much about graphs as much as you do, but at the end, you said that they were like, and Kiefer reassured that at the end, there's the important wavelengths of the brain waves were at 8. It was 6, 8, and 10, more or less. That's specifically alpha,
so
beta,
10
and
is the low alpha right there.
Yes.
And then we have 8 is the high theta, and then 6 is the middle theta. right?
But you can say that it's alpha, beta, and theta.
No,
The
alpha, theta, theta, delta is what this is showing. Up here, it's pretty quiet.
and with this perspective, like Randy said before, not long ago, I was very focused on getting gamma high, and I couldn't do it. But after this session, I think that it's not that one brainwave is more important than the other, but to achieve like a more transcendent states, theta it's more important than gamma, or it gets you to those states more deeply.
Well, again, I don't think it's that we want to really focus on getting the brainwave, but it's focusing on the state of consciousness.
Yes.
Right. And that the brainwaves are one correlate with states of consciousness. That's where what we're practicing is the felt sense of the state, the infinite space, the pure awareness, the felt sense of that. And then we can correlate that with our own shifting brainwaves as we look at the graphs.
I understand, but it's like the question of the egg and the chicken.
Well,
If we want to grow in this path,
egg.
Who's the egg?
The state
of
the egg.
I know, but now that we know brainwaves, it's very difficult to get them out of to just look at them as a help to get there. More than that, I think we have to learn how to use the brain waves to help us get there also.
Yeah, then obviously the graphs can be helpful if you have the right relationship with them.
Yes,
right?
I understand that.
Relationship with it.
From my last sessions and after this session, I think that if I want to get there, I have to concentrate more in theta and in alpha. The way it works with the what's the word you use, Kiefer, to suppress. I think that the suppress factor of alpha and theta are very important to help us get there.
Right, but again, that's from training attention and
Yes.
focusing in specific ways. That's what does it. You know, Stephen and I, we've been doing these practices for 35 plus years. We never even knew what brainwaves were until 3 years ago in reference to meditation. So it's all from practicing, love from the heart and the infinite space of awareness. And
yes.
And controlling the attention so that it's just that. And if anything else comes in, it just kind of flows right on through. That's it, right? So it's all our relationship to our inner state and to our attention focal points. That's where the practice is. And then you can say, look over time, like Holly did, and say, oh, well, look, I focused on that, and or Randy, and said, look, over time, these waves raised up. And you can see in your graphs too, Abby, that there's changes over time.
Yes, that's right. Well,
yeah, I was going to just to comment on that, Abby. One of the greatest insights that I've had in practice was with Kevin and Kiefer, where fundamentally, what are we trying to do? If you look at the big picture, we're trying to touch the essence of who we are through our practice, and that essence can be as simple as being open, living a life that's effortless, living a life that's filled with love and flowing in compassion and very clear, right? So that those are the fundamental things, you know. Do we want to live suffering free? Yes. Do we want to be happy? Yes. Do we want to flow in life? Absolutely, right? So we ask those fundamental questions first. Who are we, and what does it mean to, you know, be living this life in a flow with effortless flow, and, you know, in this calm, loving, compassionate, happy way. From those fundamental questions, we develop practices that help attune us to the part. It doesn't matter whether it's Kriya, Tummo, Qigong, Dzogchen, Mahamudra, you know, Kabbalistic part. It doesn't matter, actually, because you've got to tune into the path that feels the most effortless to you. Fundamentally, you don't want to be at any point of your life after years of practice trying to do something, because you actually realistically want to be it. And I had this discussion with Kevin Kiefer. So I'll show you what Kevin and Kiefer pointed out primarily, is that no matter what my brain, no matter what my practice was, so I'll share my graph first. Can you see that graph there, the theta alpha one? Is that what shows up?
Yeah.
Yep. So Kiefer pointed out to me that it really didn't matter what my practice was, and it didn't matter what Muse showed. The fundamental orchestral arrangement, the melody that was playing in my brain all the way through, was pretty much what Kevin's been talking about here, and what Kiefer, that theta was there all the time, and that so this theta of around 7 hertz, 7.6 hertz. Kiefer was the one who made the joke that my brain looked like the Schumann resonance, because it had theta all the time at around about 7.6 and alpha all the time at around about 14 hertz. Now, it didn't matter, Ebby, whether it didn't matter, for example, whether my graphs showed this, which is what Kevin was talking about. So you can see that graph of the, you know, like AFC, you know, this is the one that caused so much consternation in the Muse community when Kevin and I posted these, you know, these gamma graphs. They're not important, right? I mean, Kevin and I weren't placing any importance upon them at the time, because it's not about the graphs, and it is not about whether you're reaching it. I mean, fundamentally, it's about whether you feel this really deep sense of love and effortlessness and calmness and beauty and insight and wisdom. It's that, right? The graphs are really just simply helpful pointers to this flow of life that we're all sharing. So Kiefer pointed out to me that it didn't matter what graph of Muse, it didn't matter whether I sent him a high gamma graph or when I presumed that I was doing what seemed to show a dominant delta graph, didn't matter, because my brain still showed what I just shared with you there, you know, around 7.6 hertz theta all the time. It didn't matter what part of the meditation I was doing, much like Kevin's, you know, and this alpha of about 14 something. And I'm not going to comment on the delta, because like Kiefer said, I don't know whether it's artifacts, but there was really strong delta and really strong gamma. I always showed that. But again, like Kiefer's pointed out, I don't want to comment on whether that's valid gamma or not, because I don't know. I can feel it. I feel these states. And like Randy's pointed it out already, that my brain fundamentally, when I sit down, it's lit. It feels like the entire inside of my brain looks like a light show. And that's just, I've practiced that for many years, you know, nearly 40 years of doing Kriya yoga up and down the spine. That's why the Taurus energy that Kevin and I keep emphasizing, Taurus, you know, is really a crucial assist to grooving that channel. Because as I've discovered over my lifetime, that those Taurus energies actually help me to connect to animals, to space, to other humans, to, I mean, it's phenomenal. It does things that, you know, most people would consider nothing short of miraculous, but it's actually simply a groove. We're not separate, right? We're not separate from, none of us here are separate from each other. We are simply part of this one felt awareness that as we're getting deeper and deeper into this together, we're starting to feel it. And you know, many of us are showing this theta state more and more as like Kevin's graph shows, more and more as being an orchestral melody that's playing all the way through. It doesn't matter what we do, that melody is actually playing. And that's, so if you're going to point towards anything, I do agree with, you know, Randy, Kiefer, Kevin, Holly, everybody else who said that, then these fundamental, you know, alpha, theta, and delta are really crucial towards pointing a baseline signature that gives you this effortlessness, calmness. Do you aim for the brainwaves? No, you do what all of us have been doing, and that is you find the practice that feels effortless, and you really deeply absorb. So this is where some of the, you know, Dan Brown points it out many times, that the key factors are not the brainwaves, obviously. The key factors are, you know, first, can you bring attention? First of all, do you understand the big picture, that it's all awareness? And then, are you aware in every moment? And if you're aware in every moment, do you bring attention that way? If you're bringing attention to, and you know how to use attention, then you go, as Dan Brown said, the first really deep quality to develop is concentration. Can you, for example, stay concentrated on a candle flame, then close your eyes and see the candle flame there for 5 minutes? So we used to practice this with Yogananda, you know, really simple concentration exercises. And then can you can you open your eyes and still see the candle flame there for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, whatever. We used to do these, you know, practices for hours and hours, really crazy practices, but they were amazing in terms of concentration, because once you've learned concentration, just as we've said in ROV courses and books, that then leads you into absorption, because when you can concentrate deeply, you can also start to really absorb so totally on one object that nothing else exists except that one object. And you're still in subject-object relationship. But at the point of absorption, then, when you learn what it means to fully absorb in an object to such a point that it actually takes on a quality like beauty, is that when you're so fully absorbed that the actual quality of absorption itself starts to manifest, starts to flower. So you actually are no longer now on the object, because in fact the breath itself becomes the object, and then the quality of whatever is in the breath for you, like beauty, becomes the actual, you suddenly realize at a certain point in your practice that it's all about that quality, that if you feel that quality of beauty for an instant, you actually let go. You think, oh my goodness, it's never been about the object, it's about the quality that I am, right? And that's where the I am that's the practical relationship of I am that to any quality, because you suddenly let go, maybe for the first time in your life, of all these objects that you've had to actually train into. You've actually had to use attention to train, to be able to develop concentration, to be able to absorb, in order to be able to recognize that you are the very quality that you've been harnessing, or that you've been sculpting. Once you realize that, once you realize you're the quality of whatever it happens to be, calmness, openness, emptiness, clarity, that flowing nature of love, the unobstructed nature of compassion, whatever it happens to be, the moment you recognize that, you actually let go and you become the quality. You've no longer got a subject-object orientation. You've actually, literally, at that point, you've understood what it means to let go. And you become the quality. You become love. I mean, that's what Mingyur Rinpoche says in a lot of his retreats is that there's a moment where he became love and love became, there's no longer any separation. He's no longer trying to meditate to get somewhere, because you actually become the very quality that you've been cultivating. And that's, I know it's so simple, and that's what the Buddha said. It's so simple and it's so close and it's so ridiculous that I'm just going to stay in a forest, because nobody's ever going to believe how simple it is, because it really is that simple. You literally are and do become and simply are the quality that you've been cultivating. And if that quality is the really deep nature of beauty and the breath, for example, you'll feel it. And it will, and how will it translate? Generally by that pattern, as Randy said, by theta, because the theta literally, and going to what Kiefer said, the theta literally is the transcendent aspect of the brain. It's the transcendent melody that the brain plays when you're literally so absorbed that you become the quality, and the quality itself is self-liberating, because you let go. You let go of that subject that's been hanging on to the object for so long, in fact, probably for your entire life. That's why it's such a revelation. The moment it comes, then there is simply open awareness, because there is nothing else, and there never was anything else, and you're never separate from it. It's indivisible. You've always been that. It's just that you've never recognized it, because you've been in subject-object referential relationship for such a long time. Anyway,
and that quality is a bridge then. A bridge to just pure open awareness.
I don't know if you can hear this, can you? No?
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, okay. I'm on the tab, so I don't know whether things work. I was just to make a comment. I just love this your session here, Kevin and Kiefer and Stephen, and all the comments everybody's made. As one of you said, we've got to know each other through an interconnectedness that we recognize in each individual, and it's not so much the graph; it's the other side that we're seeing in everybody. And I have this alpha thing I've had ever since we started, and I was surprised to see. I don't know what that means when it's up there, but I noticed that my rest of the graphs don't really move unless I change that. I have to bring it down, and then it activates the theta and the delta. And using your 5 layers, Kevin, I'm starting to recognize, and I guess maybe it's partly me and partly I don't think you want to start all this work when you're a senior citizen. Believe me, it's a focus thing when you're a senior citizen, I think. But I'm noticing your 5 layers. I'm starting to sense when some of these, the theta and the delta are coming together. I can sense something, and that's why I've posted a couple of times about wondering if other people use this 5 layers. And the reason I do it is because I follow you through in the 5 layers, and I can see when you move through layers 3, 4, I can sense that. I can sense something is different, and it comes up, and I just had a session with that this morning, and I could sense that whatever that layer is on our Muse, it shows up, and I can sense it's a different thing. I know alpha isn't floating up in the clouds, because it doesn't happen when alpha is floating. And I don't know why it's up there. It's just part of me, I guess part of my background. It's who I am. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, and that 5 layers is basically an idea of going from coarse sensations to more subtle sensations until formless awareness, right? So it's just taking, kind of structuring the natural process that happens with any focal object as we go deep enough.
Yeah, and you're able to see the change on a graph, as well as I'm trying to sense it. And I remember breaking one graph up as to this, the layer 1, 2, 3, so people would get the sense that this is your layer 3. And I'm starting to see a change in my graph on this layer, you know.
Yeah, and
So
that's where the devices can be a great tool. You
yeah,
know,
it is.
and when we have the right relationship, a healthy relationship with them, when we're focused on the inner state and we're really sensing, like you said, I can sense when I move from that to that, and then I can see it reflected in the
Yeah.
graph, and then I can see change over time. It becomes just a wonderful tool to use. Again, if we use it within knowledge of all the oversimplifications and the differences between devices and so on, and just use it as a tool for watching our own inner states.
Yeah. And I wonder also with that high alpha, I also wonder if that's part of the reason I feel so connected to the natural world, if it's something related to that that alpha. I don't know if there's a connection there.
It'd be interesting to have Kiefer do a power spectrum density graph on you and just see
If it's actually there.
Well, yeah, and to see the theta. I'd be interested to see the theta there too, because of your strong connection to the natural world and that relationship to the Schumann resonance. And anyway.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, and that I noticed our time, and so I want to thank everyone for participating and for your practice and for your engagement in this wonderful community. So just thank you all. It's such a blessing to be part of this group.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful. And Kevin, thank you for sharing those graphs. They really are fantastic, incredible insight. Just to see the actual flow, the flow from Muse to Flowtime to the lab reports, and then into what Kiefer did. Kiefer, thank you so much for all you've done for me and for Kevin, for everybody here, because it's really incredibly valuable. Very, very deep insights.
Yeah, thank you, Kiefer.
It's my pleasure just to be here and to have the opportunity to have those insights, right? To have you guys give me the actual, so you guys are the insights. I'm just a mirror that reflects them back at you, right? That's the key thing. So my pleasure.
All right.
Great session. Thank you. Very informative, and it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much to all.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye for
Thanks,
now.
everybody.
Take care, everybody. I'm
Bye,
jealous. I'm
everybody.
jealous, Kim. You'll have to hop the fence. I just read your chat message there. Hop the fence and then FaceTime me.
Yeah. See you all.